Clerk will call the roll.
Senate roll call, the 13th legislative day, January 27th, 2023. Anderson? Baldwin? Barlow? Beitman? Boner? Bouchard? Brennan? Case? Cooper? Dockstetter? Ellis? French? Murphy? Garou? Hicks? Hutchings? Ide? Jones? Kinski?
Here.
Kolb? Landon? Larson? McCune? Nethercott? Pappas? Anderson? Rothfuss? Salazar? Schuler? Scott? Steinmetz? President Driscoll excused.
Excused.
Mr. Vice President? Baldwin? Excused. Barlow? Bouchard? Dockstetter? Hutchings? And Senator Scott. Excused. Thank you. On the roll call, 24 present, 7 excused.
Prayer today by Reverend Rick Veit of St. Mark's Episcopal Church.
Thank you, Senator, and it's been an honor to serve with you all this week and to pray with you all. I offer you a collect for guidance. Heavenly Father, in you we live and move and have our being. We humbly pray you so to guide and govern this Senate and all of those who are a part of this process by your Spirit, that in all the cares and occupations of their lives and in the business set before them, they may not forget you, but may remember that they are ever walking in your sight through your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Senator Ellis, Pledge of Allegiance, please. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Reverend, it's been our pleasure to have you here. I notice legislative session always goes better when we invoke the Lord to inspire us. And so we're going to give you a token of our appreciation and a Wyoming Senate thank you.
Thank you very much.
Reading, correction, and approval of journal.
Mr. Vice President, the Journal Committee reports that the Journal of January 26, 2023 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Senator Larson, Chairman.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, the report is adopted. New business. No doctor of the day, and Fred is in a meeting, so everybody try to stay healthy. Oh, that's right. That's right. Do you know where the AED is, by the way? Okay, keep an eye on that. Today in Wyoming history, to increase nighttime automobile safety, Wyoming begins manufacturing reflectorized license plates in 1957. Quote for the day, someday everything will make sense. But for now, laugh at the confusion, smile through the tears, be strong, and keep reminding yourself that God does everything for a reason. Today is Josh Salazar's last day. And Josh, please come to the mic and give us a few parting words if you could.
Well, first off, I'd like to start and say thank you. It's truly been an honor to serve for this past week, and that's really all I can say is thank you, thank you. And I hope to be back here next year serving again. Thank you.
Messages from the House.
From the House of Representatives, message number 121, January 2023. Mr. President, your committee, I beg your pardon, the following bills passed the House on third reading by the votes indicated. House Bill number 11, State Park Rangers Retirement, ayes 60, noes 1, excused 1. Message number 122, House Bill number 14, Civil Case Filing Fees Amendments, ayes 35, noes 26, excused 1. Message number 123, January 2023. House Bill number 26, School Facilities Appropriations, ayes 49, noes 12, excused 1. Message number 125, January 2023. House Bill number 44, Road and Bridge Construction Alternative Contracting, ayes 55, noes 6, excused 1. Message number 126, January 2023. House Bill number 45, Peace Officer Retirement and Rehiring, ayes 53, noes 8, excused 1. Message number 124, January 2023. Mr. President, the following bill passed the House on third reading in an amended form. House Bill number 33, School Finance Career Technical Education Grants, ayes 37, noes 24, excused 1. Signed, Katie Talbot, House Chief Clerk.
Thank you, folks. One reminder, your ethics disclosure form is due at the end of the month, January 31st, to the Secretary of State's office. And also a reminder, the last thing we're going to do today is introduce Senate File 1, the budget bill, and that will kick us off on Monday with the budget week. Senator Ellis.
Mr. President, may I put privilege of the floor?
Please.
For the ethics disclosure form, I know it's hard for some of us to even sneak away to return these. If anyone wants me to take them, I will take mine today, so feel free to put it on my desk on the corner here if you want me to take your ethics disclosure form.
All right. Thank you, Senator Ellis. Senator Pappas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice President. The form can also be emailed. There's an email address on there, so you don't actually have to go over there and drop it off. I emailed mine yesterday and it was fine.
Okay. Senator Landon, you had something?
Mr. Vice President, may I have privilege of the floor?
Please.
Mr. Vice President, when you've been down here for a little while, there are days that you just kind of have those kind of moments that come back to you a little bit. And yesterday we glossed over and jumped right into the hard work of the place. And I was just reminded this morning that it's good to have a little sense of humor along the way. It's good to pause for a minute, reflect. And I was reflecting on the fact that we get to have that piece of artwork at the front of the room. And it was introduced yesterday, a former colleague of ours. And I just wanted to share a couple of things. Maybe someday we'll share thoughts about each other along the road. But that senator, I recall a couple of things that I remember fondly. When I was a rookie, I can remember meeting Senator Coe for the first time, and he said, just remember, if you don't know how to vote, just vote the way I do. You know, another thing, I can remember we were in one of those debates like we had yesterday, and we were going tooth and nail on something, and Senator Coe stood up and he said, well, he said the bedroom lobby kicked in on this one. You know, one of the things that he brought that people kind of forget about was a great sense of humor. He obviously did a great deal while he was in the Senate. One of the things I can remember, our schools were kind of languishing years and years ago, and under his leadership, obviously we have risen to the top 10 in the country in many different measures. And so, not to diminish the fact that he was a heck of a senator, but I was just reflecting that he had some fun along the way too. And just wanted to share those. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thanks, Bill. Hank also brought perspective. Those decades of experience really gave him perspective. Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate those reflections, and and in my time here serving with Senator Coe, I learned numerous Coe-isms. Several of them I can't share with you on the floor, but one that, keeping it light, I'll never forget Senator Coe sitting up there, and as we just went through a number of bills this week that were very closely divided votes, I'll never forget Senator Coe getting up. He says, "You know, folks," he says, "some of my friends here on the floor are for this bill, and some of my friends on the floor are against this bill. And I'm voting with my friends." So, Mr. Chairman, was a great senator. Those Coe-isms are things I'll always take with me as I leave this body. So anyway, I did want to give people, Mr. Vice President, a purview of what we're going to try to get done today. We'll get through second and third reading. We'll do a little bit of committee of the whole. I've asked our Sergeant of Arms to stay abreast of what the highway situation is as of right now. Pretty much every road, unless you're going to Kimball, Nebraska or south, is closed. And so what we'll try to do is keep the latest information. But if there's bills that come out this morning and the roads are still closed, my plan is to work those bills as committee of the whole. If we get through first and second reading, do a couple of bills on committee of the whole this morning. When that's done, if the roads, any roads that people can get home on, we're going to call it a day, but we may work later. And so this will be a fluid. Our Sergeant of Arms is actually in contact with YDOT, so we'll get a little more updated information quicker than what shows up on their webpage, hopefully. But that's kind of the plan. So I guess the answer is it's going to be a little fluid as we get into committee of whole and get closer to that noon hour is what we do, but it'll be predicated based on what the highway closures are. So, Mr. President, that's kind of the order of business today.
So Senator Hicks, I have a question. I and perhaps many others signed up for that YDOT program that you can go past the gate, even though the gate is closed, if they deem it safe. They just are holding people because they don't want everybody to get stuck in Chugwater or wherever. Is Dick going to be tracking that as well?
Yeah, so we'll look at those rolling closures. And if that opportunity avails to allow local traffic and legislators to go through, then we'll wrap it up as quick as possible. But if that is not available, I mean, even if it's sometimes it's closed to everybody. A lot of times those are wrecks. It's a public safety issue. They're just not going to even let local traffic and legislators through. But we'll keep appraised of that. At any opportunity that we can get out of here after doing a few bills in committee of the whole, if those roads are open, then we're gonna allow people to go home. So, any questions on that, Mr. Vice President?
Okay, I'm informed that an email just went to all legislators from Matt Obrick with it's a travel update, Ellen? Okay. We're now at that order of business. Reading of bills on second reading. Oh, reports from standing committees. Jumped ahead. Reports from standing committees. All that talk about going home got me excited.
January 26, 2023, was President's Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred Senate File 146, State-Funded Capital Construction. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, and Nethercott. No, Senator Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 26, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 3, Revenue, to whom is referred Senate File 110, Personal Property Tax Exemption. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Beitman, French, Ide, McEwen, and Pappas. Senator Beitman, Chairman. January 27, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 90, Wyoming Property Tax Relief Authority, respectfully report same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Carew, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 27, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 127, Wyoming Stable Token Act, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Carew, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. No, Senator Anderson. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 27, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 141, Transportation Technology Transfer Center Program Funding. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Carew, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Thank you. We're now at that order of business. Second reading of Senate files on second reading. Senate File 92, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 92, Small Customer Electrical Generation.
Senate File 92, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 128, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 128, Transfer of State Lands Exchange.
Senate File 128, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 130, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 130, Educational Freedom Act.
Senate File 130, we have an amendment, and Senator Hutchings. Oh, please read the amendment. Read the amendment.
Senate File 130, Second Reading Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 8, delete.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move a second reading amendment to Senate File 130 and ask for your favorable consideration. As I promised yesterday, we were going to try to find a place to put this bill, and we decided upon 21-9-101, educational programs for schools, and all the rest of the amendment is just conforming to that. So again, I ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Discussion. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That amendment is adopted. Senate File 130, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 136, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 136, Property Tax Relief Assessment Rate Reduction.
Senate File 136, we have 3 amendments. The clerk will read the first amendment.
Senate File 136, Second Reading Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 2, after.
Senator Guru.
Sorry. That's what you want?
This was distributed yesterday. This bill was laid back.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good.
I move, or have we had the amendment read in?
Yes.
I'd like to move Senate Amendment 1 for Standing Committee Amendment, number 1. Second reading amendment, sorry. Number 1 for Senate File 136 and ask for your favorable consideration. Good members of the 67th, this is a simple amendment to this bill. It just provides for a sunset, a 2-year sunset to this legislation. It gives us an opportunity to take a look at the effects. I know we've heard a lot, as the good bringer of the bill was saying on first, or in his comments, there's been a lot of talk about this bill, a lot of scare, a lot of worry, a lot of fear. And I heard it too. And I do agree with the bringer that I don't see some of the things that go bump in the night that some do, but I do listen, and this is an attempt to try to, frankly, to get you to vote for the bill. Is to put a sunset on it so we can take a look at it. Then if some of the darker fears come true, then we can just jettison this and move on to something better. But if not, we can vote in the sunset and continue on. It gives us an option, it gives us kind of a way out, and an auto way out if you prefer it. So that's really all it does. I hope you'll give it all due consideration and support the amendment. Thank you. And we'll stand for any questions.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'm gonna have to be on and against because for a couple of reasons. Number one, I have an amendment coming up after this that would be in conflict because I would like to make this effective for this current tax year. And if you adopt this amendment, it would only be for 24 and 25. That's reason number one. Reason number two is this isn't a typical looking sunset provision that we normally see in our bills. And this is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of written into the code as, you know, except for calendar years 24 and 25. It's kind of not how we do things typically with sunsets. Usually it's in a separate section in the bill. So for those two reasons, I'm against. Thank you.
Further discussion? Further discussion. Senator Grew for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I will check with staff as far as where it is. I wasn't trying to do anything nefarious. I promise I was not trying to do a sunset to the whole tax program, in case anyone was wondering. You know, you wouldn't think of me doing that, but I will check with that. And I get with the bringer offline. And if there's a way we can work it out, we'll try to work on a third reading amendment. But for now, I would encourage you to vote aye. Thanks.
We are on second reading Amendment 1 to Senate File 136. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. That amendment is not adopted. Next amendment, clerk will please read the second amendment.
Senate File 136, second reading amendment number 2, page 2, line 8, delete.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I move second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 136 and ask for your aye vote. After discussing this bill with the good tall senator from Bates Creek, we came to the agreement that my original idea of dropping it down to 7.5% from 9.5% without bringing down the industrial category as well is going to be out of that constitutional variance allowed. I just focused on the 4% plus or minus part of the Constitution. There also is a phrase right before that plus or minus 4% that says within 40% or 4%. So without getting into the fuzzy math on that, we discussed it with LSO. They agreed that the good tall senator was correct. So we'd have to go, the lowest we can go without bringing down the industrial category would be 8.5%. So it's a little less than 8.5 we like good round numbers, easy numbers. So we just dropped it 1% down to 8.5%. That's the first part of the amendment. Second part of the amendment says, well, why can't we do this for this current tax year? We looked into when the mill levies are applied, how the process works, when the counties take into consideration their fair market values. Currently, they're in that process of determining the fair market values. Then come April or May, they apply the mill levies, and then the tax amount is determined and you get sent your tax notice. So there's still plenty of time, if it were the will of the body, to adopt this amendment. The tax relief could be in place for this year for our citizens. So that's what the amendment does. I'll stand for any questions.
Senator Case.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. I'd like to divide the amendment. And the division that I propose would be, Division 1 would be the question of raising the 7.5% to 8.5%. Division 2 would be Section 2 and Section 3, which is a new effective date to increase just deal with the effective date separately, Mr. Chairman. That'd be Division 2 and be lines 10 through 18, 10 through 17. Right, you're right. That's what I said. Be line 9. Certainly line 9 needs to go with the second division. Thank you.
So Senator Case, I have Division 1 as 1 through 8. And I have Division 2 as 9 through 18. I believe that's divisible. Which division would you like to take first, Senator Case?
Take 1 first. I support Division 1.
Okay, discussion on Division 1, Senator Scott.
Mr. Vice President, just briefly on Division 1, the effect it does have on the fiscal note, as I understand, is to exactly cut the effect in half, and that makes it safer long-term. So this really, Division 1 is also a compromise on this whole issue.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Further discussion? Okay, on Division 1 of the second reading amendment to Senate File 136, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That division is adopted. We are now on Division 2. Senator Case.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I feel it's a really bad time to give property tax relief, not because what we're experiencing right now, but what we're going to experience in the near future. We're going to have a dramatic reduction in revenues. We have the lowest property taxes, and I sincerely believe that when people don't have skin in the game, or their skin in the game is reduced, we get poor consequences for government. So, Mr. Chairman, I would oppose moving the effective date up to this year.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I would vote aye on this. I think I wasn't so sure we could get it done this year. That's why my original bill draft had the 24 effective date. But after talking with some folks, it definitely can be done this year. So I think this is, again, this bill is the only bill that we have to provide immediate or near immediate relief to our taxpayers. Everything else would require a constitutional amendment, or it'll take a lot longer to implement. So if we want immediate tax relief, this is the horse to ride. This is the vehicle to do it. And if we're able to do it in 2023, let's get it done. Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Vice President, this is a key issue, and it's a limited issue. Are we going to have 1 year's tax relief, which we know we can afford? You look at the surplus we've got now, we can afford this. So the question is, are we going to do it, or are we going to leave the money for the spenders to spend on more government? Mr. Vice President, I ask for the yeas and nays on this division.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Vice President, just a question, what happens if we don't pass this? Does the bill not have a date, or does it revert to the past date?
Further discussion? Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, my question is just on the logistics. I just want to be sure that that this is doable and implementable to have this turned around. I know when I served on the Revenue Committee, there's always the discussion of we can't get our computer systems up to speed and changed and all that kind of stuff. So I just want to know if this is doable, or if this will cause panic out there.
Okay. Senator Ide and then Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I think that we have already cut this thing in half for a big benefit to the folks that are against this bill. So I would encourage this thing to start as early as possible. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So I do appreciate the effort of the bringer, and our colleague from Natrona County. This is actually something I engaged them on as well, starting it sooner. I understand the logistics, all other properties, all other types of tax relief. The one thing that I will support this division, but I want to take a look at section 2. It talks about the applicability of this new rate. It only mentions 1 year. It doesn't mention anything beyond that. So we're going to set something in law for 1 year, and then after that, there's no applicability. So I think while this may be appropriate, I think we need to think clearly about what this actually does after 2023 calendar year. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against the division, but just for the standpoint of interpretation based on the last question, I don't think there's any problem with the structure of Section 2 because the first division that we just put into place is the statutory language that would effectively apply from that point forward. So it becomes a 7.5% valuation. The only reason why Section 2 is needed is to ensure that it's effectively calculated as of that moment. And I do think that if you're interested in the second division taking place, it is the essential aspect that has to be there to get the 2023 taxes incorporated. Otherwise, it probably would default out, particularly with the effective date of April 1st being shifted. So my interpretation of its structure is that it's correct, but vote against it anyway. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice President, excuse me. Several questions on the technicalities here, and we did check this, and we had a very creative idea. It was given to us by another member here. Moving it forward 1 year, we're already in that process, but the part of the process that is occurring right now is simply figuring out the fair market value or the productive value, and that will go on until basically all the appeals run out and we get to August, and then they will apply the 8.5% tax rate to this year, as well as will be done going forward. So that works, but the LSO staff felt that Section 2 was needed for this particular year because we are changing the rules once the early part of the process has started, but it's making it clear that this is really only going to affect the latter part of the process. And Mr. Vice President, computer problems should not cause any difficulty here. It's 1%, and if your computer won't do it, your calculator will. It's not a complex change that needs to be done. Shouldn't be any difficulty. And typically, that calculation has to be held until the assessments are complete. And we aren't changing that whole assessment process at all. That's where the complication would be. So, Mr. Chairman, I think this works perfectly well, and the Section 2 is appropriate because it's really only needed for this year.
Further discussion, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Vice President, just some clarification on page 2 under subsection C. It uses the language all other property. So I'm on line 18. It says all other property, real and personal. Then when we get to the amendment and we bring in section 2, it says all other property classes for taxes assessed in calendar year 23. Is that real and personal left out of the amendment for a reason? And what's the effect of the amendment on that?
Okay, further discussion? This is on Division 2. Is this your first time? Second time, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. To answer a couple of the questions, I think The reason why they worded it that way on section 2 to the good majority floor leader is it mirrors kind of the language of the Constitution when they refer to that all other class, property class. I think that's why that's worded that way. And then to echo the statements of the good tall senator from Bates Creek, currently, right now, they're in the process of determining fair market value. All we're doing is changing what they're multiplying that by, from 9.5% to 8.5%. It's a real easy math calculation, and it's not a big deal. It should not create panic amongst the counties to be able to figure that out to get to your taxable value and the mill levies applied. So, pretty easy fix. It's just a policy choice to implement it sooner rather than later, and I would encourage your aye vote.
So Senator Beitman, as a courtesy to the body and to me, I don't have a copy of the bill. An aye vote, let's clarify what an aye vote means. Aye means this starts a year earlier?
Correct, Mr. Vice President. So on Division 2, an aye vote would implement this for this current tax year. A no vote deletes that portion of the amendment and goes back to the original bill language, which states this act is effective January 1st, 2024.
All right, thank you. Senator Barlow, the sponsor's spoken a second time. Is it a point of clarification or point of order? All right. So on division number 2 of the Second Amendment to Senate File 136, all those in favor signify. Oh, ayes and nays been requested.
Roll call on Division 2, second reading Amendment 2 to 136. Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Barlow? Aye. Beitman?
Aye.
Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case?
No.
No. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? No. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinski?
Aye.
Aye. Cole? No. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McCune? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll excused. Closing vote. Baldwin, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. On the division, 20 aye, 10 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, Division 2 of Amendment 2, Second Reading Amendment 2 to Senate File 136 has been adopted. Third Amendment, the clerk will please read the amendment.
Senate File 136, second reading amendment number 3, page 1, line 2, after.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Vice President, I move second reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 136. Senators, some years ago, we used to have a food tax, and it produced revenue for counties and cities. And we removed that and said that we would reimburse them the $105 million that it costs them every year. And we did that for quite a few years. We did give them 105. I'm not sure we're still doing that, but I recognize this as being the same kind of thing. So in your boxes, you have this chart, and it shows who's actually paying for this. On the amendment, it says they're the distributees. So they're distributing the funds, and it's coming out of their funds. It's not coming out of the state of Wyoming funds. It's coming out of the county, the cities, the special districts, community colleges, local school districts, and the school foundation program. That's who's paying for this tax relief that we're talking about doing now, which I think is a wonderful thing. But just so you know, that's who's paying the bill right now. So what my amendment says is that they won't pay the bill, that we will pay the bill. So on the first paragraph, we just say that the distributees of the property tax revenue may apply to the Department of Revenue for reimbursement of reduced property tax revenue. That's on paragraph B. And then the other portion that's the same in paragraph E on 3913-111. We also have on section 2, the 84 million that this will cost per year. So that 84 million will come out of the general fund and go to the revenue department for I've got some help going on here. So that will go to the revenue department to reimburse those distributees that are going to have their revenue decreased by this tax relief. So that's what my amendment does, and I urge you to support it. Thank you.
Discussion on the third amendment. Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'll be on and against. Anytime you see an amendment coming into one of your bills that goes into the title of your bill and starts changing stuff around, it's a pretty significant change to the bill. If you notice page 1, line 2, you're getting right into that enactment of the bill and changing some things around. So it raises some suspicion there. And also on the fiscal note, yes, this appropriates 84 million, and it's based off of the fiscal note that's on the bill. It's a little more than the fiscal note on the bill. And then when I talked to the fiscal staff on LSO to get to what were your underlying assumptions on that fiscal note, because what are you basing that on? And it turns out it was based on only 3.5% rate of increase in assessed value or fair market value. That's pretty low. That's lower than inflation right now. And we've seen our property fair market values go in the double digits, Mr. Vice President, in the last few years. So if you think that your fair market values are only going to increase in the next 3 or 4 years, 3.5%, that's your choice. But I just want you to know that this fiscal note is a very, very, very conservative number. And so keep that in mind, especially when you're taking into account this $84 million appropriation. So I think it's a little overkill. I think we have the money right now, Mr. Vice President, in the surplus. That's the reason for the bill in the first place, is to be able to pay for it through that surplus. And we're taking in more money now currently, Mr. Vice President, than we need, hence the reason for a tax cut. So on and against.
Senator Ellis, and then Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I understand this. The bringer of the bill said that our coffers are full and they're overflowing, and we see that on the goldenrod. My understanding is that maybe our counties and cities don't have those overflowing pools of money. So this is an attempt to make sure that they're kept whole while we provide this relief. I just want to make sure I'm understanding the intent of this, because I certainly look at our balance sheet and the goldenrod and understand the bringer of the bill's intent. My concern is on the county side, if they don't have those pools of money, the impact on that. So just more discussion on what this actually does.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. On and for this amendment, I think this is what really gives me an opportunity to feel a little bit better about the tax cuts. I like the idea of them. I'm glad for the First Amendment. I kind of suggested that the other day, that I think the 8.5% might be a better fix. But I think if you take a look at the good senator from Casper's handout, not only would we affect county, cities, school foundation, community college, and so on, those special districts, take a look at the small print for those of you that can still see that. You're going to have to go back home if you don't pass this amendment and tell your special districts, your cemetery, your solid waste people, your weed and pest people, your conservancy people, your senior citizens, so on and so forth down there, gosh, we took away a bunch of your money. I know a lot of them, I've talked to some of the county folks, and they've spent their ARPA funds and they're back where they were, and everyone understands that the state is flush this year. Why we would not want to backfill and make these people whole, I don't understand that. So I'm definitely on and for. I hope you will vote for this amendment.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Vice President, on and against this amendment. Mr. Vice President, think of what we're doing. We're reducing the taxation on the classes of property that make most difference to people, their homes, their cars, things like that. we have seen a tremendous escalation, well above the rate of inflation, in the value of the biggest item here, the homes, commercial property. What we're doing is not taking away revenues that any of these special districts have been depending on long term. What we're doing is cutting down on a windfall that they have been getting because of the property value escalation. And for that reason, I don't think there's a tremendous need to have this amendment. I think they'll be operating just fine the way they have been. If you're concerned about the cities and counties, the schools, we'll deal with that effectively in the budget. If there really is a problem, that's the place to deal with it, not here. But special districts, you're really saying, okay, you aren't going to get this big windfall that maybe you were going to get. And maybe it's really not such a big windfall when you look at all the special districts. I think relatively small percentage for them, but I think it's not necessary on and against.
Senator Landon, then Senator Hicks.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. You know, if you go along with that kind of reason, then what this tax cut is a cut to our local municipalities, to our counties, to our school districts. We're just tossing that little hot potato right on down to the localities, right? I just don't think that's right. I support this amendment because all it does is say, we want to give this tax cut and we're going to do it. We're not going to ask our local governments to take the hit. It's up to us. And just in terms of transparency, Mr. Chairman, why would we not want to reflect that in a line item to let people know, hey, we granted this tax cut, but we had to budget the money to do it. That's all this does. This amendment actually gives me an opportunity to be more in support of the bill. If we turn it into a tax cut that's on the backs of those local government entities, that's a pretty tough lift, because we've been known not to live up to our word, and we may not return that money. So on and for the amendment. Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a couple of things, and when it talks about across the board. So let's dispel the myth that every special district, every county, and every municipality had a windfall. That's not true. You had counties where you had price escalation in the western part of the state and the high amenity communities like the Bighorns that had property taxes skyrocket. About 5 counties, Mr. Vice President. This whole debate comes down about what's going on in the western part of the state with the escalation of property values. You know, I've got a whole bunch of places, like 13 little municipalities like Wamsutter and Bear Oil and Medicine Bow and Elk Mountain, Dixon, Baggs. They didn't experience any windfall. We didn't have property values come in here and escalate at 3 times, 4 times, 30%. Didn't happen. But what this bill does is effectively say, you guys are going to reduce your tax base. Oh, let's see, I've got 2 rural healthcare clinics. They didn't experience a windfall and tax revenue to come into them because they're in the same little communities, folks. Cemetery districts, across the board. So, you know, you can smooth this thing out and take a statewide average, or you can look at the actual impact, and I can show you a whole bunch of places that there wasn't this giant windfall that came in. And the property tax that we have is what they live off of. This is the fairest way across the state to say we'll keep those other local entities whole. So let's make sure what we're doing here. This is really being driven by a regional issue. It's not a statewide issue. So, Mr. Chairman, I think this is probably the fairest way to address that. Everybody gets tax rebate under this amendment. Everybody. But it doesn't have the negative consequences of blanket reduction in taxes for those entities, rural healthcare dentists, hospital districts, cemetery districts, museum districts. Each one of you have these districts. I got a lot of them in my area, and they live off these property taxes, and they did not incur some giant windfall. So, Mr. Vice President, I support property tax relief. This is what I think is the fairest mechanism to make sure that we keep everybody whole on and for the amendment.
Senator Bouchard was next. No? Okay, Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. You know, frankly, I have just a little bit of pushback from the comments that the good senator from Bakes Creek provided. I don't think we should decouple the tax relief and the backfill that we're going to give to local governments. I agree with everything that good Senator Hicks mentioned. We need to keep our local governments whole. But you know, I've been here long enough that I understand that the only way we would backfill them is it'll have to be through a budget amendment, through the budget. And I know that process, how difficult it is, and how our memories really don't jive when we're in the budget process. We have this debate now about this tax relief. I feel that we will not remember this conversation. And I don't know, maybe some of us have selective memory and we choose not to remember the conversations. But I do believe that it is appropriate to couple tax relief with the backfilling of our local governments within the same bill. So in all good due respect to the tall senator from Natrona County, I believe the two should be together. Thank you, Mr. President, or Mr. Vice President.
Further discussion, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I represent 5 counties, 11 school districts, 15 municipalities, plus all those residents within. Without this amendment, I really seriously wonder if this bill is passable. We really got to do something for the tax relief. I think this is a good tool, and I think the amendment makes it palatable to our counties, municipalities, school districts. I think we absolutely have to couple the two together. Thank you.
Senator Dockstader and then Senator Biden.
Thank you. I have my reservations about it, but I go way back to a time when we took another tax when you went to the grocery store and we made it go away. We didn't hear a thing about it from our local governments at the time, but when we went home, we heard about it. We said, why'd you take that money away from us? We said, well, we're reducing taxes. Isn't that what we should be doing in government? So ultimately, what we're doing, this is probably one of the better property tax bills we have in front of us. And I would hope that would bring all of our local governments to the table for a discussion, because all we've been hearing is property tax, but the reality check is when you take it back down, you cause this whole ripple effect across your local governments. You probably won't hear about it. If we did this, you probably wouldn't, and if we didn't have the amendment, you probably wouldn't hear about it till you go home and they'd say, what did you do to us? I would hope everybody would come to the table on this. So I'm going to reluctantly support the amendment, but at some point, we're not having a reckoning. It seems difficult to have both worlds. Affordable property taxes and keep everybody whole and even. You see the amount, it's going to cost a lot of money. Thank you.
Senator Bateman and then Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Yes, we just still need to keep in mind the reality of the situation is we're halfway through a biennial budget. Our counties are whole. Our counties are operating we budgeted them their money. The sky is not falling. They have money to operate. Meanwhile, we're still taking in more money than we imagined, hence the need for a supplemental budget to spend it or save it or give it back in tax relief. Those are our options. So the idea that we have to backfill, what we're doing is just backfilling the rate of increase. And they want it all. They want even everything above and beyond what we're bringing in. So we're taking money out of one pocket and putting it in the other, basically. And we may be putting in more than we need to based on the inflation numbers that the fiscal note's based on. So we don't even know what we're doing yet with this amendment. This 84 million could be way more than we need. We don't even know yet. So I'm on and against. Let's stick to the policy of the principle of the tax cut based on a surplus, based on more revenue coming in than we need. And let's take a look at this next year in the budget. If we need to backfill, we can backfill in the budget. Direct distribution, get that money to the counties if they need it. And they can disperse that money how they see fit. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, on and for the amendment, and I want to start off by saying I agree entirely with the majority floor leader. I think anytime that's true, it's worth noting on the floor. A couple of additional thoughts, though, as we get into the discussion. One is the inequity across the state, where we do know that we're bringing in a substantial amount of revenue to the state from property taxes. So when we aggregate across the state, we have a tax surplus. Regrettably, my county doesn't have that great of an assessed valuation, and it didn't go up that much. What my county treasurer estimates is that this, even with the 8.5% instead of the 7.5%, would lead to a county shortfall of about $1 million. $1 million is pretty substantial to the county of Albany here in the state of Wyoming, and we honestly need that money. We're not taking into consideration a couple of key factors. First of all, when we say we'll backfill that, does everyone remember that we used to have sales tax on groceries? We took that away because, don't worry, the legislature will backfill for it. Does anyone here or in the state that's listening feel like the legislature has effectively backfilled for the grocery tax? We might have for maybe a few weeks. I'm not entirely sure how long that was solid. But the direct distribution at this point in time falls well short for, again, my community on what we expect from a grocery tax if that grocery tax were in place. So we have good intentions. I know we had good intentions at the time. But once it starts going through the appropriations process and we start looking at financial shortfalls, the cities, towns, and counties, the communities have no way to make up those shortfalls, which gets to my final point, Mr. Vice President. We have caps on the amount of mill levies that our communities can actually implement. So if we decrease the valuation, it's not as if you can just then increase through the localities the mill levy because they're capped for cities and for counties. Special districts are another story. There might be an opportunity to add to some special district mill levies in certain circumstances. But by and large, many of our communities are truly at their limit of taxation, particularly on property taxes. As a result, we are basically handcuffing communities even further to meet their needs if they're experiencing a shortfall because they don't have any dynamic capacity to adjust their revenue structure as we decrease their local revenue. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan, obviously, of this piece of legislation, but this amendment goes a long ways to making it workable for our local communities, our counties, and our cities. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to point out one thing, I think the intent of raising or lowering taxes in general makes sense, but we've just made a dramatic change in the last adoption of amendment. The original effective date for this was January 1st, 2024, which would have given our towns and counties some time to plan for maybe some reductions in their budgets and revenue. We changed that to April 1st, 2023. I don't know about you, but I'm guessing that my counties and cities kind of have plans for the year. We did make a big dramatic change. We haven't heard from our communities. So I just want to highlight that we're flying a little blind here, so we need to be thoughtful.
Senator Nethercott and then Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the amendment, I do think it's prudent to move cautiously. Does anyone in the room or in the state dispute the statement that Wyoming has a volatile revenue stream? Any appreciation will result in profound depreciation. We are about to approach a recession, and this was a bump that will go down. Maybe not as much in the western part of the state. It is important that we are cautious and move carefully and recognize that the brunt of this will be carried by our cities and counties on and for the amendment.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'm on and against this amendment. I think that, you know, a good percentage, I don't know exactly what the number is, 60, 70, 75% of these property taxes go to the schools, K through 12, you know, junior colleges, where we're spending per capita always in the top 5. And I think that we can, you know, with this bill, this puts pressure on that, and I think it needs to put pressure on that. So we can get in line with some of our neighboring states here that are half per student, a lot of them, Utah, Idaho. So I think that this amendment is, I'm on and against it. Thank you.
Further discussion, Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to belabor the point, but my colleague is exactly right. Where you have counties and communities where they've had a significant 25, 30% escalation in property values, this amendment probably does do this and does this. Takes it out of one pocket. It's not all 23 counties. It's not all 96 communities. It's not all 640 some special districts, from healthcare to rural hospitals to your weed and pest districts. It's different on the eastern part of the state than the western part of the state. This is what it does. It takes money out of their pocket and it never goes back in. It's a subtraction. Now, I have a house in a very rural place in the state of Wyoming. My property taxes didn't go up last year. I own farmland in 2 different counties in the state. One county up in the northwest saw an escalation in my property values. County down in south central Wyoming, I saw actually decrease, very slight, let's just call it flat, for the property values on that ag land. This is probably not the best tool, but it's the most fair tool that we have right now available to us. On and for the amendment.
Senator Bouchard.
Mr. Vice President, I'm kind of challenging this amendment. I think it changes the scope of the bill. So under Rule 11.6, I don't think it's constitutional. I'd like the chair to make a ruling.
Yeah, the chair does not rule on constitutionality. That's a question for the body. Sorry.
Mr. President, pursuant to the Rule 11.6, it talks about how the Constitution actually is anyway, let me just read the rule. Rule 11-6, scope of amendments. Pursuant to Article 3, Section 20 of the Wyoming Constitution, no bill shall be so altered or amended on its passage through the Senate as to change its original purpose. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
So I'm going to treat this as an objection on the basis of germaneness, and I will rule that the amendment is germane. Further discussion. Senator Anderson, for your final time.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The question was, how does this distribution work from the sender from this county? This distribution is who's distributing the money as the bill is written. That's who will pay for it. And I am submitting that those people should not be the people paying for it. It should be this body. And the maker from Tongue River has said that we have a surplus of funds, and I agree with him, and I agree that we should pay it into returns to our citizens in this bill. And if we have a surplus of funds, we ought to turn it over to these organizations to give it back to our citizens. And that's what this amendment does. I'd appreciate your vote. Thank you. Can't hear you.
I say the bringer of the amendment already spoke for a second time.
It's a point of order.
Okay, point of order.
My point of order is that you gave me a ruling that it wasn't germane. That's not the question I had. And I mean, the only thing I know to do next is to challenge your ruling to the Rules Committee, Mr. Vice President.
Well, first, I can't, under the rules, I'm advised by the clerk, I don't rule on constitutionality. I can rule on germaneness, and I ruled on germaneness. And if you had an objection, I think it was not timely. We already, the bringer of the amendment spoke for a second time. Senator Rothfuss.
So, Mr. Vice President, it moved on quickly. He's certainly in order to object to your ruling relative to this particular rule to the Rules Committee pursuant to our practice. That would be my interpretation. Again, it's particularly from the germaneness standpoint, but this gets to the rules. The ruling that was made from the chair was not specific to the ruling objection that was made by the senator.
So we will convene the Rules Committee and stand at ease on two questions. First, whether the objection was timely, and second, whether the amendment is germane. Senate will stand at ease. The ruling of the Rules Committee was to sustain the chair by a vote of 3-1. Senator Beitman.
So I'm not sure what to say now. Would I object to the ruling of the Rules Committee?
Would be appealed to the
Or
body.
I appeal to the body for a vote?
Okay, the ruling of the Rules Committee is being put to the body to either sustain or override the chairman. Senator Dockstader, would you take the desk?
It's about process, Charlie. It's not about.
Okay, the ruling of the Rules Committee. It's debatable. You will have an opportunity twice. You're allowed twice at 5 minutes each. All right, let's go to you, Senator Biden.
Actually, can I defer to? Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, not necessarily on the merits of the amendment. I bring this objection on the process because I think it's important that we stick to our rules, and especially this particular rule regarding altering bills beyond their original intent. And I think this amendment does do that, Mr. Chairman. I think when you start going into the bill title and adding an appropriation and changing distribution of a tax when the original intent of the bill was just to lower the assessment rate, I think that does so significantly alter the bill that it should be rejected. So not necessarily on the merits of the amendment, sir, but just on the process and how we do things and how we adhere to our rules. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. For the debate, Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, for my first time, I was the one vote. I voted to overrule my ruling, so I want everybody to know I was wrong. I believe I was wrong. Don't look so shocked that I would say that. And
Senator, we're not shocked. I'm still getting used to the two floor leaders agreeing today, so go ahead.
I concluded that after listening to counsel, and I concluded that my understanding of Rule 11.6 is flawed, or was flawed. That rule provides for scope of amendments pursuant to Article 3, Section 20 of the Wyoming Constitution. No bill shall be so altered or amended on its passage through the Senate as to change its original purpose. Well, first, I've seen bill titles amended hugely, and the bill floats through the body. And I was told that that's because nobody objected. If that bill title does not contemplate what the amendment is, then it's flawed under the Constitution. But I didn't realize there was that much life in the rule. I'm glad there is that much life in the rule, because I do believe the bill title should give adequate notice. The second part of it is, council advised us that while other legislative bodies might be more lenient, it's the history of the Wyoming legislature that if there is an appropriation, that is called out in the title. And in the original bill title, that was not called out. In fact, you notice the amendment, specifically on page, on line 3, says appropriating funds, which begs the question, if this amendment was germane to the bill, why was it necessary to bring an amendment to the title? It was necessary to bring an amendment to the bill title because clearly somebody felt that it was necessary to make it germane to the bill. So I concluded that I was wrong, and it has nothing to do with the merits of the bill. It has entirely to do with wanting to uphold Article 3, Section 20 of the Wyoming Constitution.
Okay, so Senator Anderson will come back to the Vice President. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I would submit that it does not change the intent of the bill. The intent of the bill was to give a tax benefit to the citizens. That remains. All the amendment does is change who pays for it. Instead of your local entities paying for it, the state is paying for it, just like the maker from Tongue River said, we have the extra money, we should put it up. You can debate whether the 84 million is correct. It may be less than that. That was the best guess that LSO could do at the time. So we put it in there, but we said it would revert. It is not a windfall. So it does not change the original intent. We like the original intent and want to move it forward, but we want to change who's paying the bill for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go back to Senator Nethercott and then over to Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Article 3, Section 20, which is not new to this body. It comes up every week as a convenient excuse to do maneuvers like this, but it says as follows. Laws to be passed by bill, alteration or amendment of bills. No law shall be passed except by bill, and no bill shall be so altered or amended on its passage through either house as to change its original purpose. And so the question is, what is the bill's original purpose? The bill's original purpose is to reduce the real property tax rate for the people of Wyoming, right? That is its purpose, and that purpose remains. If this bill passes as amended, that purpose is achieved. The amendment is constitutional. It does not amend its purpose, which is to reduce the effective tax rate on the people of Wyoming. It's that simple.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, let me say, I don't like the amendment, but Mr. Chairman, I think it is entirely germane and entirely consistent with the way we've handled it. I think if we don't uphold the ruling and rule that it is germane, we are changing the practice of the Senate, practice of the legislature that I've seen for all my years. We routinely add appropriations to bills. They don't have it if we think the appropriation is needed to achieve the purpose of the bill. And that's the argument on the amendment, that to safely achieve the purpose of the bill, we need the appropriation. I'll happen to agree with it, but I think it's germane, and I think we will find if we change our historic interpretation of what that provision of the Constitution means, Mr. President, and what our rules mean, we are going to find we have hamstrung our ability to legislate effectively. So I think this is a fundamental process question, and I think we should uphold the ruling and find that it is germane, Mr. Chairman, or I think we will find we have difficulty because we have to back up on that in order to be an effective legislature. We are being way too literal in our interpretation of things and carrying this to an extent that is not reasonable. It hasn't changed the fundamental purpose of the bill. It is, in the minds of some, made it workable. We can debate that, but we ought to debate it and decide it on its merits.
Let's go back to Senator Hicks, then over to Senator Rothfuss.
So, Mr. Chairman, I want to talk to the germaneness of altering the titles and is in the bill. As my colleague talked, he's seen bills, titles changed and all kinds of additions. There is absolutely nothing in the Constitution that prohibits that to happen. So let's go back and let's read what Article 3, Section 20 does. It doesn't talk about amending a title. What it talks about is amending the bill. So Section 20, laws to be passed by bill. Alteration or amendment of the bills, no law shall be passed except by bill, and no bill shall be so altered or amended on its passage through either house as to change the original purpose. There's nothing that precludes us from coming in here and altering the title of that bill, so long as it does not change the original purpose of the bill. The Constitution's talking about the bill. So by bringing in another subject that's germane to the bill in the title does not violate the Constitution.
Further discussion, oh, we got, sorry, help us, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I voted to sustain the amendment, but I do just want to pause for a second and say that it isn't a slam dunk. I don't think anyone in here should think this is night and day, bright line, obviously sustainable in terms of the objection that was made. And I say that because what we're working with is the language in the amendment, which is then from the Constitution, that no bill shall be so altered or amended on its passage through the Senate as to change its original purpose. So there's some interpretation to that. In my opinion, it comes down to the fact that it still certainly does decrease the property tax assessment rate, and that all of the content of the amendment is related to that and maintains the continuity of that. At the same time, the good Vice President suggesting that an appropriation is going to fall outside of that scope, to me, is a reasonable interpretation also. It doesn't offend me in any way that there's a disagreement there. It's not one that I concur with, but the idea that we are required to interpret this in a way that's incredibly broad so that we can have any amendment go through the system just because we like to amend things that we don't like, we don't have to conclude that way. So I don't want the body to feel like there's a bright line here. At the same time, when it comes to our practice of including an appropriation, we did discuss this during the Rules Committee. It's very reasonable to bring an appropriation if that appropriation is consistent with the purpose of the bill. That seems perfectly reasonable. It's in the Constitution, it's in the rule, no objection, no problem with that. If the appropriation in this instance were to the Wyoming Natural Resource Trust Fund, probably not consistent with the purpose. Now you're adding new purpose and you're moving outside of the purpose. So in my view, Mr. Chairman, this satisfies 11.6. This amendment is within the scope and does not change its original purpose. But again, when I hear that this is obvious and a bright line and that nobody should conclude otherwise, I think it's very worth each senator's time to think through where you want to draw that line and whether you find that this is consistent or not consistent with 11.6, because this is right in the territory where we should be grappling with the issue. To me, it's about the 55-yard line, right? Or the 45-yard line going the other way, I guess. It's not clear cut. It's just leaning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let's do this, well, Senator Case, and then I want to give both the bill sponsor and the amendment sponsor a second chance. Go ahead.
Mr. Standing In President, very good to see you. May I have, I would like to address the issue about the bill title. So, the previous reflection on didn't include the bill title. The reference to the bill title is in Article 3, Section 24. And that relegates a bill to encompassing only one subject, except there's a couple exceptions, general appropriation and recodifications. But the title is to clearly express that subject. That's the purpose of a title. It's a hunting license for people that are following the act. You could think, Mr. Chairman, that is, if we were to have a bill that comes in here that does one thing, and then we amend the title to have it do another thing, that doesn't make it okay. That makes it still hasn't provided guidance to people trying to follow the legislature. And I'm not talking about the catch title, I'm talking about the real title. But it's important to have the title, but it's not extraordinary for us to amend the title. It can happen as long as it's in conformance, I think, with the rest of the hunting license that the title offers. You can't be deceptive, though. And you can't amend the title to add another subject. And so thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator Case. Senator Kinski, I'm going to come back to you, but I want to double check because I want you to recap of what we're going to be voting on. Let's do this. Let's double check with Senator Anderson and Senator Beitman. Either one of you want to say anything on a second time? And then, oh, okay, then you go ahead. But I want you to recap what we're voting on. Go
Well,
ahead,
we are,
Senator Kinski.
yeah, the question is whether to sustain my ruling that the amendment is germane. And I'm arguing.
No, I'm going to correct you.
Okay.
Somebody more powerful than you up here.
Okay.
The vote is to sustain, override the Rules Committee. Override. The vote will be to override the Rules
To override the Rules Committee.
Yeah, there we go.
The Rules Committee ruled that I was correct, that the amendment is germane. And I'm urging a no vote, a no vote, which would reverse the Rules Committee, wouldn't it? God, there's too many double negatives here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I vote overrules the Rules Committee.
Okay. An aye vote. I'm urging an aye vote. I'd like to see life in that constitutional provision. You can imagine the founders before they had word processors. All this stuff was done by handwriting and eventually typing. And so it was very important that that bill, as it came out, gave adequate notice. And to rewrite a bill, to amend a bill, and to amend a bill title was, in their view, I think, a very big deal, a very big deal. And I think we need to honor that. In my time here, I've seen too many amendments to bill titles, frankly, and I think it's unfair to the public, and I think it's unfair to the body. I myself have gotten bills back that were clearly on one subject from our friends down the hall. It was a completely new bill on a completely new subject. They completely rewrote the bill title. I think it's necessary to draw a hard line and ask, does the bill title clearly contemplate this amendment? This amendment's fairly large. And I can bet by the third reading, it's going to get larger. In fact, the amendment may end up being bigger than the bill by the time we're all done. So I would urge a aye vote, Mr. President.
Heard that. Let me double check with both the bill sponsor and the amendment sponsor. We're good? Go ahead. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ex-President, again, doesn't change the intent of the bill. We sure want to give the tax relief to the citizens. It's just whose coffers it's coming out of. And I'm submitting, we have extra money. We should be the ones paying for that, not every entity in the state. Thank you.
Senator Beitman.
And thank you all for the debate. Certainly this was not a maneuver. This is gray area that needs to be talked about amongst the upper chamber. I think this is very important. And, you know, I brought this bill as a tax policy bill, tax policy consideration for the body and for the state. It was not a budget bill. I did not anticipate appropriating any money and distributing that money. We're in the process of a supplemental budget. The appropriations and the distribution can be handled within the budget bill or the supplemental budget bill, sir. This is strictly a policy decision on tax policy and what that assessment rate should be. Now, if you were to sustain the chair's opinion and this were to be allowed to be into my bill, then you've got an appropriation. We send it down to the other end of the hallway. What if that appropriation comes back at $1.5 billion? I have to vote against my own bill, Mr. Chairman, because completely changes the whole entire scope of my bill and the whole intent of the tax policy consideration that I brought before you. So it puts bill authors in a very precarious situation if we allow amendments like this to come into our bill titles where we end up having to vote against our own bills. I think that's why, like the good speaker previous said, the founders probably did not intend to do that, and that's why we have rules like this. So certainly not a nefarious maneuver. This is certainly a discussion that needs to be had when we see amendments like this that push the envelope a little bit. Certainly not debating the merits of the amendment. We'll get to that depending on how this vote goes, but just want the body to understand what's happening here, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Senator. We've had a question called for the I vote overrules the Rules Committee. Oh, go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Could you just one more time reiterate what we're voting on? I'm not sure everyone really understands if we're voting to sustain the committee's vote. Yeah, could you just reiterate one more
I'm going
time?
to have Senator Kinski one more time as Vice President. Okay.
Overrule the Rules Committee.
Yeah, that's what I just
So a yes vote overrules them.
Okay, Senator Schuler? Okay. All right. Roll call.
To override the Rules Committee decision. Anderson? No. No. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? No. Whitman? Aye. Boner? No. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? No. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Murphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? No. Hutchings? No. Ide? Aye. Jones? No. Kinski? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? No. Steinmetz? No. President Driscoll excused. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. On the vote, 12 aye, 18 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, proposal to override the Rules Committee has failed. Vice President.
We're back on the amendment, and as I recall, debate had concluded on the amendment because the bringer had spoken for a second time. All those in favor of, it's a roll call vote, all right? Clerk will call the roll. We are voting on amendment number 3, the Anderson amendment.
Senate File 136, second reading amendment number 3, roll call. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Whitman? No. Boner? No. Bouchard? No. Brennan? No. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? No. Ellis? Aye. French? No. Murphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? No. Ide? No. Jones? No. Kinski?
No.
No. Kolb? No. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? No. Steinmetz? No. President Driscoll excused. Closing vote. Closing. Vote close. On the amendment, 14 aye, 16 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 136 is not adopted. Senate File 136 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall it be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senator Hicks.
Here's the plan. We're just going to keep working through second and third reading. My understanding is I-25 is open. So at that point in time, then we will adjourn and there won't be any committee of the whole today, so.
And I-80 is open to Laramie. Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I got quite a bunch of my 15 municipalities sitting up here in the gallery today. I'd like to introduce. Behind me in the East Gallery is Mayor Joel Highsmith of Shoshone. Over in the South Gallery, I've got Mayor Matt Hall from Cody, Mayor John Wetzel from Powell, Mayor Jim Gill from Worland, and also up there from Tinsleep is Councilwoman Connie Sweeney and Councilwoman Amy Truman. I'd like to give them all a nice warm welcome.
Welcome, Senator French.
I was going to do privilege of the floor to introduce who he introduced, so.
Stole your thunder. Senate Files 158, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 158, Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions.
Senate File 158 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, will the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Second File 178, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 178, Mountain Lion Pursuit Seasons.
Senate File 178. Senate File 178 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate Joint Resolution 2, second reading of the joint resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 2, recognizing the service of Lester C. Hunt.
Senate Joint Resolution 2, we have 2 amendments.
Senate Joint Resolution 2, second reading amendment number 1, page 6, line 5, delete.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Vice President, I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate Joint Resolution number 2 and ask for your favorable consideration. Members of the body, this goes into page 6 on section 1. And I just want to make sure that this is accurate, at least what I would say in my form of the understanding of our government. So on line 5, it goes in and changes the word to support our democracy to support our Republican form of government. That's the First Amendment, Mr. Chairman. And then if we go down to line 9, it just strikes the word democracy. The reason I've struck that out of there because we've interjected 2 concepts there. One, democracy is talking about a form of political form of government, and then we talk about civility, decency, and truth. And Mr. Chairman, it just seems to me that we ought to make sure that we separate those out there. One's a political governance type of structure, and the other one's a moral, ethical type of structure. And I think what we're really trying to get to here is the moral and the ethical component associated with civility, decency, and truth. Honored for the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Discussion on the amendment, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I move to divide the amendment. I'm not moving. I request a division, and it would be lines 1 and 2 would be the first division, and I think we could accept that.
So on Division 1 of the First Amendment to second reading Amendment 1 to Senate Joint Resolution 2, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. We're now on Division 2. Senator Case.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think it's used differently in the second context, and it's awkward to try to say support our republic, I think, but I think democracy is the appropriate word here. We're supporting the process by which free people can establish a government, and you know, it's a cornerstone of America. And so with this resolution, the Wyoming legislature remembers and joins with the people of Wyoming and all our nation to rededicate ourselves to democracy, civility, decency, and truth. If we take out the word democracy, it begs the question of what we're thinking should be there. A representative form of government, a dictatorship. We're in this because we believe in the people's power. And I would like to keep democracy here.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. On and against Division 2, and I share this consideration that, you know, for hundreds of years, this country stood for democracy and cherished the concept of democracy and people having the right to choose officials in the government. And this was a bipartisan, unanimous sense of the country, seemingly right up until a couple of years ago. And to be quite honest, Mr. Vice President, I don't know where we lost the unanimity behind supporting democracy. I can't think of a president that didn't give speeches from either party embracing the value of a democratic system and of democracy. It's odd to me that we're trying to cancel the word democracy from things that we cherish, and that because we have identified a sense that we're no longer a democracy, but a Republican form of government, that we can't embrace both concepts. There's a lot to be said about democracy. It's done pretty well for us over the years. The fact that the people get to vote for their leadership can be embraced still. So on and against this second division, and on and against this idea that we no longer embrace democracy as a core tenet of our country.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I too am on and against this division. We're really talking about the ideals that we believe in here. We're not talking about our form of government. Yes, our form of government is a republic, but the ideals that we're talking about, Wyoming and all our nation, are rededicated to our ideals of democracy, civility, decency, and truth. So that it's correct to use democracy and not republic in this instance. Thank you, Mr. President, or Mr. Vice President.
Senator Hicks for your second time.
Yeah, Mr. President, we could.
Oh, first time on this division. All right.
So, Mr. President, this is not to cancel anything. And so inherently, if you read the structure of this, and you go back to the first sentence, and it says, the Wyoming legislature commit to respect each member and support our Republican form of government with the Division 1 that we adopted. A Republican form of government uses democratic process through a democracy to elect that government. That's the way our government works. We recognize democracy in that Republican form of government. That's how we get that, is through a democratic process to elect a representative form of a constitutional republic. This is by no means trying to cancel that. I think we acknowledge that in the first sentence. That's the way our government works. The only thing it does is it just says, now, if we bring this back in, it's redundant. We recognize in the second sentence, says the Wyoming legislature remembers and joins the people and it rededicates ourselves to a democracy, civility, and decency. We just said we did that up above through the Republican form of government. So, Mr. Chairman, on and for the amendment, it's not about canceling, it's just to actually recognize the true form of government that we have here in the United States.
Further?
Question.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I think for some people, maybe this doesn't matter. And it kind of sounds good either way, maybe. But I agreed to the change in the first part to substitute a noun, democracy, with Republican form of government. I understand where that comes from, and I think about it. But the other things are more, I wish my English were better, but more adjectives. You know, and you can't use the word Republican form of government as an adjective. So, you know, you have democracy, which is the noun, and the process and the way we get there kind of, they're going to send me back to remedial in English, but as being an adjective, like in a democratic means, Mr. Chairman. It's a civil means with decency and truth. They mean different things in here, and I think they work together. It's kind of a hill of beans thing, Mr. Vice President, but I would definitely think that it's much better that we rededicate ourselves to this process where our democratic institutions and all the things that that means. I hope you'll leave it alone on the second part.
The motion is to approve Division 2 of Second Reading Amendment Number 1 to Senate Joint Resolution 2. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Division Number 2 has not been adopted. We are next amendment. Clerk, please read the amendment.
Senate Joint Resolution 2, Second Reading Amendment Number 2. Page 5, lines 14 through 17, delete.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I said yesterday, I was going to bring this amendment. I let the bringer of the resolution know that. When we look at page 5, lines 14 through 17, I don't know if it's just me, but I look at this as an obscure commentary from a random senator, which in essence lacks civility and does not add to the memorial I believe the bringer would like us to keep in mind with Senator Hunt. So, Mr. Chair, I ask that you, excuse me, I guess I should have moved this first. I move second reading amendment to Senate Joint Resolution 2 and ask for your favorable consideration. And end it at that.
Discussion, further discussion. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against the amendment. United States Senator Alan Simpson is not just some senator, he was our senator, like Lester Hunt. These are Wyoming senators. And their words matter, and they matter to us, and they matter now. The concern that that language is offensive ironically sounds a bit wokey, right? I mean, I don't understand what is offensive about the truth of the statement of how Lester Hunt was treated. And our United States Senator acknowledging that Senator Hunt was treated with evil, with disregard for his sacrifice as a war veteran, as our governor, as a United States Senator. And it's acceptable to acknowledge both of their service as a friend to each other and a friend to Wyoming. This resolution was written thoughtfully and with the greatest care by one of our greatest senators in our state in the corner here. Further amendments to this resolution seem a bit much, particularly for a resolution. On and against that amendment.
Further discussion. Senator Hutchings, for your second time.
Thank you, sir, and hopefully for the last, just to kind of go over what my Laramie County senator just said. At no time did I say this, his comments were offensive. I just said it was kind of obscure and random. And to say it's wokey, I don't know where that's coming from, but again, It's an obscure commentary from a random senator right in the middle that lacks civility. That's what I said. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The motion is to adopt second reading amendment number 2 to Senate Joint Resolution 2. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That motion is not adopted. Senate Joint Resolution 2, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate Joint Resolution 5, second reading of the joint resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 5, Air Force 75th Anniversary.
Senate Joint Resolution number 5, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Senate Joint Resolution 7. Second reading of the joint resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 7, Support for Taiwan.
Senate Joint Resolution 7, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Folks, we're now going into third reading. I'm informed that there is a grab-and-go lunch in the lunchroom. Feel welcome to help yourselves. Just be cognizant that we maintain a quorum on the floor. Mr. Majority Leader, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have a consent list?
I move third reading consent list as Senate File 33, defining aircraft for purposes of hunting prohibitions, Senate File 109, prohibiting chemical abortions, Senate File 113, Architects Practice Act amendments, Senate File 117, parental rights in education, and Senate File 137, subdivisions, fencing requirements.
Would anyone like any one of these bills removed from the consent list? Senator Barlow?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. There is an amendment to Senate File 109, and I'm fairly confident I heard that being read as part of the consent list.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, I didn't hear 109. Did you read 109 as part of the consent list?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chairman, and I
right,
would
then.
remove that from the consent list.
All right, I'll have you restated in a minute, right after Senator Bouchard. Senator Bouchard?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'd like to hold back Senate File 134, right to farm real estate disclosures for one day, if there's no objection.
Okay, I show 109 and 134 is off the consent list. Please repeat the consent list.
It wasn't on there to begin with.
Point of order.
Sorry, I misunderstood the motion. It was to lay back.
Yep, point of order.
Yeah, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. I think the appropriate protocol would be to remove it from the consent list at this time, and then, once it's on third reading, ask that it be laid back for one additional day so that we have the procedure right. So with that, just since I'm standing, I will ask that Senate File 134, right to farm real estate disclosures, be removed from the consent list at this time.
It was never on there to begin with.
Well, that makes it even easier.
Yeah. Hearing no objection.
Bet there
All
won't
right,
be.
Senator Hicks, let's just run through it one more time, make sure we're all on the
All
same
right.
page.
Ladies and gentlemen, consent list is Senate File 33, defining aircraft for purposes of hunting prohibitions. Senate File 113, Architect Practice Acts amendments. Senate File 117, parental rights in education. Senate File 137, subdivisions, fencing requirements.
Would anyone like any of these bills removed from the consent list? All right. Turn his mic off, okay. I lost my place. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 33, defining aircraft for purposes of hunting prohibitions. Senate File 113, Architects Practice Act amendments. Senate File 117, parental rights in education. Senate File 137, subdivision fencing requirements. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
On the consent list, Anderson. No. Baldwin? Barlow? Whitman? Boner? Bouchard? Brennan? Case? Cooper? Dockstetter? Ellis? French? Murphy? Guru? Guru, no. Hicks?
Aye.
Hutchings? Ide? Jones? Kinski?
Aye.
Kolb? Landon? Larson? McEwen?
Aye.
Nethercott? Nethercott, no. Pappas? Rothfuss? Salazar? Schuler? Scott? Steinmetz? President Driscoll excused. Repeating noes on the consent list, Anderson, Ellis, Guru, Nethercott. On the consent list, 26 ayes, 4 noes, 1 excused. Senate File 33, are there any changes? Anderson? No to aye. Guru, no to aye. No to aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 33, 29 aye, 1 no, 1 excused. Senate File 113, are there any changes? Ellis? Ellis, no to aye. Guru, no to aye. Anderson, no to aye. Nethercott, no to aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 113, 30 aye, 1 excused. Senate File 117, are there any changes? Case, aye to no. Rothfuss, aye to no. Landon, aye to no. Pappas, aye to no. Barlow, aye to no. Cooper, aye to no. Schuler, aye to no. Murphy, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 117, 18 aye, 12 no, 1 excused. Senate File 137, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 137, 26 aye, 4 noes, 1 excused.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 33, defining aircraft for purposes of hunting prohibitions, Senate File 113, Architects Practice Act amendments, Senate File 117, Parental Rights in Education, and Senate File 137, Subdivisions Fencing Requirements have passed the Senate. I need 109. Senate File 109, third reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 109, Prohibiting Chemical Abortions, sponsored by Senator Salazar, an act relating to abortions.
And we have an amendment. Clerk will please read the amendment.
Senate File 109, third reading amendment number 1, page 4, line 11, delete.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, what this amendment would do would be to delete the drug misoprostol. That's probably the only time I'll be able to say it. And I've learned that this drug is a very useful drug. It does not induce abortions. It is used as many common medical uses. I'll cite from a physician who brought this to my attention. Misoprostol, or Cytec as we call it, is used every day by OB/GYN physicians. We use it to induce labor, soften a cervix before induction of labor or a gynecological procedure, and for treatment of potentially life-threatening problem of postpartum hemorrhage, which is bleeding after a delivery. And so they're very concerned that if we tighten down this drug, it would become less available. This very important, needed, useful drug that saves lives would become less available and potentially blacklisted by pharmacies. And it's important we keep this one available.
Further discussion on the amendment? Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where do I begin? I oppose this amendment. It's an attempt to kill this bill. In fact, these drugs are not in this bill because I put them there. These drugs are used to take human life. I will tell you that I've been in communication with almost all of the major pro-life organizations in Wyoming. They oppose this amendment. They oppose it. Clearly, some people have not read the bill. Let me refer you to the bill. Page 2, line 5. Only for the purpose of procuring or performing an abortion. These drugs can be used at any time. Let me repeat that. These 4 drugs can be used any time except in the taking of a human life. That's all this bill does. Now, pro-life Wyoming, and let me define, by the way, let me define what when I use the term pro-life, let me define that for you for what I define it as.
Senator Hicks, floor leader.
We should not be using proper names of organizations in debate, so just.
I don't believe I did.
Yeah, sort of. Go ahead, continue, Senator.
Okay, I don't believe I did, Mr. Majority Leader. So, back to my train of thought. When I use the phrase pro-life, I define that, and what I mean by that is those of us who believe that abortion is the taking of human life. So when I use the phrase pro-life, that is what I am referring to. The vast majority, in fact, all those quasi entities that I was mentioning are opposed to this amendment, and they are in favor of this bill. I will tell you this, as I mentioned to you on first reading, I have done my very best to accommodate those on the floor. I've put exceptions into this bill, and you can read them. It's a 4-page bill. I know you've all read this bill. I've put exceptions into this bill. I've lowered the penalties. I have done everything in my power, but this draws the line. Each one of these drugs is used in the termination of a baby. I ask that you oppose this amendment, and Mr. Chairman asked for a roll call vote on this amendment.
Okay.
I will tell you that to those of you who are pro-life, Here's your opportunity to take a roll call vote. Pro-Life Wyoming is watching, literally, right now. And I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Noting that he's using a generic term, go ahead, Senator Baldwin, and then to Senator Breenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number one, a clear misconception. Misoprostol is not used to take a life. Misoprostol is a drug that's used exactly like the other good senator explained. Of and by itself, misoprostol is not used to take a life. You all need to understand that. So when it's put on that list, and it's not that it's on that list and saying it says on that list you absolutely can't use it for anything. What the good senator told us and what the doctors told us and what I would tell you is if somebody gets that drug, they tell their pharmacist, they tell their doctor, they tell however that happens that they're going to use it for something else, to treat ulcers. They're going to use it to induce labor, whatever it's going to be used for, and then they use that drug as a part of a regimen to complete an abortion. Note that it's not by itself. It has to be used in combination with something else. Then it puts that pharmacist, that doctor, that whoever at risk. And the end result of that is going to be that the manufacturers, the pharmacies, whoever are going to pull that drug away from the market and make it unavailable for use. Not just for use when there's an abortion done, but for use inducing a labor, for use doing an OB procedure, for use doing any of those things. So I would caution the body, misoprostol of and by itself is not used to take a life. It's a safe drug, it's FDA approved, and I think it's important that we recognize that. And I will support this amendment because I don't think it hurts the bill. I think it may help the bill and make the bill more effective. But I would give an aye vote on this amendment.
Thank you, and then we had Senator Breenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would urge a no vote on this amendment. I started my career out in labor and delivery, as well as I've given birth to 4 kids. Misoprostol, I believe, was used for me after giving birth on one of my children. Being that I have had some experience with this medication, I just want to shed some light on some of this. Misoprostol, as it has said, is used for inducing labor, gynecological procedures, and to treat postpartum hemorrhage or excessive bleeding after birth. There have been some questions raised that if this medication is not removed from this list of medications banned for chemical abortions, then the OBGYNs will not be able to use them for their intended purposes, and the cases of when a mother's life is at risk. This simply is not true. If we look at page 2, starting at line 5, we read that we are banning these medications for the purposes of procuring and performing an abortion. This clearly states that these medications are being banned for the use of abortion, no other reason. It does not ban their use for their intended purposes while providing care in the labor and delivery setting. Mr. Chairman, one of the jobs of doctors is to diagnose their patients and treat them accordingly. Our doctors are highly trained professionals, and they know the difference between an induction of labor to a full-term baby into this world and gynecological procedures, postpartum hemorrhage, or chemical abortion to end the life of a baby. Our doctors have a responsibility to know what they are treating and why. It would appear to me that there would be some that know if we amend this bill and take out misoprostol, that we are creating a loophole in this bill that it would allow for the possibility of chemical abortions to take place, rendering this bill and piece of legislation invalid. Again, I would urge a no vote on this amendment.
Further discussion on the amendments, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On for the amendment, the confusion that perhaps I have with regard to the explanation that's been given on why we should, those of us that are concerned about this shouldn't be concerned, relates to that paragraph A on page 2. And the concern is with the lack of explanation for what is meant then by the phrase, no person shall manufacture, distribute, prescribe, dispense, sell, transfer, or use any chemical abortion drug in this state, etc. If all of the first part of that paragraph weren't there, I think it would make sense as far as the explanation is concerned that no physician, for example, shall use any of these drugs for the purpose of carrying out an abortion. The challenge comes down to what the good senator from the physician's realm, our chairman of the Labor Committee points out, which is that I think as written, it would clearly chill any possibility for manufacturers to engage in Wyoming, for anyone to distribute these drugs in Wyoming, to prescribe the drugs in Wyoming, to dispense, because they don't know the intent, certainly on the manufacturing side. How do you know if you're manufacturing it for what purpose? Do you put a label on, shall not be used for this purpose? Or how does that even work? I mean, if we are not going to take misoprostol off the list, then it has to be very, very clear that it's okay to use it for these other purposes, that it's okay to distribute it, prescribe it, dispense it, sell it, transfer it. So I do understand the intended interpretation, but that's not what the plain language of the legislation says. The plain language of the legislation makes it very clear up above that you can't do any of these things with the intent of chilling the delivery of these. And if the desire is simply not to utilize these drugs and utilize misoprostol for the purpose of procuring or performing an abortion, it would be very easy to strike the list on top and just start with use any chemical abortion drug in the state, etc. But it's clear that there is no interest in amending this bill in any way, that every word of this bill is sacred and shall not be changed, which is why such amendments have not been proposed. So I would ask the bringers of the bill that are opposed to this amendment to explain exactly what is meant by manufacture. What are we talking about there? How do we forbid manufacturing misoprostol in Wyoming for the purpose prescribed? Same for distribute, prescribe, dispense, sell, transfer. I think if this amendment is disallowed because we need to keep this bill pure, each word should be able to be explicitly defended in the capacity of what it means with regard to misoprostol. So let's hear that explanation on and for this amendment.
Further discussion, let's go Senator Boner and then the floor leader in that order. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to comment. If that was the amendment, that's something I think that we could have a discussion. That would alleviate the problem that we're dealing with. Unfortunately, that's not the amendment that we're dealing with. This amendment does something entirely different. So if the concern is to not catch up pharmacists who are otherwise, or prescribing this drug for an otherwise legal purpose, then that should have been the amendment on lines 3 and 4. That's not what we're dealing with here. So I just have to say, just personally, in terms of the process when we talk about this very difficult topic, I personally, as a legislator, have a lack of trust with not necessarily all physicians, and certainly appreciate the expertise of our labor and health chairman, but the physicians who are adamantly pro-abortion have consistently exaggerated the truth to the point where it's no longer recognizable. So there's a deficit of trust in this process when it comes to this topic. And I think that's coloring this discussion as well. So certainly if the amendment was to do what we just described, I think that'd be a different discussion. That's not the amendment here before us.
Mr. Floor Leader.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the debate and so, but I've always been kind of a Ronald Reagan kind of guy, and trust but verify. So I'm looked up on this very reputable medical clinic that starts with an M in the Midwest, kind of like Mayo. But Mr. Chairman, so I'm just going to read what they have posted. It says, misoprostol alone can be effective when used before 9 weeks of gestation of an embryo. Alone, it's less effective than other types of medical abortion. So if you want to get early, this is what's published out there. Apparently it is used and it is effective if the embryo is less than 9 weeks old. So just information for the body.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, sir. And I was going to add to that. I'm looking up the warnings. This may cause birth defects, premature birth, uterine eruption, miscarriage or incomplete miscarriage, dangerous bleeding. Do not use if pregnant. If you are become pregnant, you will need to have a negative pregnancy test before starting this treatment. Pretty clear what this drug can do. Obviously, it has other indications you can use it when you're not pregnant, but that's not what this bill contemplates, sir. It contemplates abortion, and this bill can be used on its own to induce an abortion. That's why it's listed in the bill. I think this amendment completely guts the intent of the bill, and I would reject the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? We are on the amendment. Do we want to come back to sponsor? We're good. Ready for the question? And there was a roll call requested.
Senate File 109, third reading amendment number 1, roll call. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? No. Whitman? No. Boner? No. Bouchard? No. Brennan? No. Case? Aye. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? No. Ellis? Aye. French? No. Furphy? No. Guru? Aye. Hicks? No. Hutchings? No. Ide? No. Jones? No. Kinski? Kinski excused. Cole? No. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? No. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? No. President Driscoll excused. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. On the amendment, 8 aye, 21 no, 2 excused.
By your vote, third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 109 has failed. Puts us back on the bill. Senate File 109. Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, here we are again. And I want to say what I always say when it comes to this third reading, this vote. I said every time. We spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, lots of letters. And now we've even heard, when we're talking about the amendment just now, who's watching. People are, I thought they watched everything we do, but the groups are watching. Yeah. As I say to all groups for or against this, I wish we could all come together and work for the day when no abortion is needed, through education, through learning, understanding, teaching our youth, taking an active role in their lives more. We can end this without laws. We can end it if we have the will, if we work together, if we spent all the money that was spent fighting about this issue. We could have solved it years ago. But we fight. I'll be voting no. Because frankly, at the end of the day, this little bill takes away the fundamental right of 50% of the Americans in this country. I know you're doing it for the best of intentions, but make no mistake, that's what's happening. And that bothers me, it makes me sad, but that's the way it goes, I guess. I'm not in that 50% group, but it's the way it goes. Once again, I just wish we could work together and end this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further discussions on Senate File 109. Over to Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to just kind of push back on what we just heard, that this is a full-on attempt to support abortion if you voted for that last amendment. And I have to be honest, Mr. Chairman, I have constituents in my district who have given birth. They've used this medication, some of the medications listed on here, to induce labor. And so we do have to be thoughtful when we're balancing these interests. I am pro healthy, safe delivery of babies. I love kids. I wish I had more. So I just want to push back on the notion. I think we're presented with a very difficult task of balancing rights and harms. So that medication stays in here. I'm guessing this bill passes. Okay, well, let's make sure and monitor with our doctors. Please call your doctors and say, Are you seeing the effects of this chilling effect that we heard about? I heard one senator talk about how we can't trust our doctors. I think the one doctor that's probably being denoted tends to be someone who delivered my children. So we're being asked, these are real people, real issues. I just really reject the notion that if you voted for the last amendment, somehow you're not pro-life. I think that some of these medications have legitimate uses. Talk to your friends that have ulcers. If they receive this medication, have they had any disruption in their being treated with their ulcers with some of the things listed in this bill? So just a word of caution, senators. I think we're all trying to do our job here. We can disagree on things, but this is, I think, underscores and highlights the importance for us to really understand what we're passing. With few exceptions in here, we're not doctors. I am not an expert on these medications. I'm not an expert on what happens between a doctor and their patient. And so, but that's what we're being asked to legislate on. So just a word of caution, senators, like please follow up with your doctors and make sure that this isn't negatively impacting other healthcare services that are offered or provided with these drugs. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that we want to get out of here. If you take out the little directory that people are good enough to do that have our pictures in it, a little bit of a write-up, you can certainly find out, you know, even what denomination of church that I attend. And that's fine. Proud of that. And I think once you look that up, you're going to know how that particular church feels about this issue. Today, I just wanted to rise, not to change any minds. We all knew a long time ago where we were going to land on this thing. I want to explain why I'm going to vote no on this bill. It kind of caps a week in which we have grown state government. This bill further climbs inside the office of our doctors. I think it's too much state government, too much out of Cheyenne, less separation between what I believe and what I really think ought to end up in the green books. I'm gonna vote no, not just for our healthcare workers back in my district, who I believe face some liability here if we pass this bill, but simply because from now on this particular issue, I believe this needs to go to the voters. We're going to keep rolling these out down here in this chamber, 30 of us, deciding for an entire state. It's time to go to the voters with this one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further discussion? Senator Rothfuss?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not against the bill, and I think an important thing to realize is that the bill actually really doesn't apply to the pro-life community as described by the good sponsor of the bill, because that community already is going to adhere to this bill, already shares the beliefs, it's consistent with their religious views, their strongly held values. What this bill is about is forcing that same viewpoint on all those that don't share that belief system, those values, that disagree. It's diminishing the freedom of those that disagree with the proponents of this legislation. It is big, big government. It is really trying to make sure that where there is disagreement and difference in opinions, that we make the views uniform based on one group's numbers being greater than another group's. This is not necessary. This is certainly not providing anyone with new freedoms, new rights, new abilities. It's just shutting down one viewpoint and deeming it wrong. Mr. Chairman, I don't want to convince anyone of anything with regard to this. I want to respect all of your viewpoints, and I do. And I think everybody in here knows I do. And on behalf of my constituents, we're not trying to require anything of anyone. But as we do that, Mr. Chairman, we want the same respect in return. We want to recognize the disagreement, accept the disagreement, and accept that there are differences, and embrace those differences and have conversations about them, and explore ways where we can perhaps find better outcomes for those parents in need that are struggling, that are contemplating an abortion when maybe there are alternatives that would be better for them and their family. But the idea that the solution is a ban, is more government, is ensuring compliance and restriction and criminalizing a decision that is more often tragic and not a desired outcome, but something that comes during a time of hardship. Criminalize that decision is regrettable. On and against the bill.
Okay, let's go to Senator Ide, then to Senator Hutchins. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be the first to advocate for limited government, small government. But if we cannot protect life, how can we protect liberty? Thank you.
Senator Hutchins.
Chair, on and for the bill, we keep hearing a lot about our viewpoints, religious, and so forth. But I remember the first day I was sworn in, and one of the things I was asked to do was to swear on that I would defend the Constitution. And when I look at our US and Wyoming Constitution, it's very, very clear that government should be involved in securing life. That is the main reason we exist as a government and as a body, is to first of all secure life. And that's in our US and in our Wyoming constitutions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Back to Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll talk for just a minute about a young lady I knew in the mid-70s. In her mid-20s, I suppose she was, having a lot of fun out in life, and found herself in a bad situation that she didn't want to be in. She didn't have a lot of alternatives. She knew somebody that knew somebody that knew somebody. And 4 or 5 hours later, she's laying on an operating table at St. Vincent's up in Billings, about to bleed to death, while the doctors took that baby and tried to save her life. 4 or 5 years later, she ended up killing herself because she couldn't accept what she did. There was no mental health available at that time for these situations. So I guess, you know, I'm as pro-life as anybody in this room. I'm kind of inclined to go with this bill, but my question right now is, are we going back to the dark ages? My cattle, if I have a cow that's struggling and going to be in trouble, I can go down to my local vet and get a shot to help her slough that calf. Am I going to give my cattle better health care than I give my daughter? I'm not sure what the right answer is there. You know, we can be very, very conservative and still be compassionate. So my question to the bringer of the bill is, what are the alternatives to this? Before we just say absolutely no, what alternatives are available for the legal abortion that is still out there? Is it strictly physically taking it? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the bill, this is why. Right here, 6, 5, see, I can't count. 5 beautiful grandkids, beautiful souls, beautiful minds. That's why I'm for this.
Further discussion? Senator Hicks?
Mr. Chairman, to answer my colleague's question over there, so when the courts overturned Roe versus Wade, they said it's a state issue. So the idea that there's no access to abortion is just not true. It's just the states. So the answer to your question, what's the solution, is this, it's just about 10 miles south of us, or any of those other states that are going to legalize through state legislatures. So there's options out there. You just may have to travel. We travel all the time for healthcare in this state, Mr. Chairman. But that's the answer to it. It's still available. It's still out there, readily available. You just may have to travel across the state line.
Thank you. Further discussion, Senate File 109. Ready for the question. Question being called. Senate File 109, prohibiting chemical abortions. Take the roll.
Senate File 109, third reading roll call. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin?
No.
No. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Murphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks?
Aye.
Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinsky excused. Cole? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McCune? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? No. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll excused. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 109, 23 aye, 6 no, 2 excused.
Senate File 109. Senate File 109 has passed the Senate. Third reading. One more bill for our consideration here. Senate File 134, please read it in.
Senate File 134, Right to Farm Real Estate Disclosures, sponsored by Senator Bouchard, an act relating to property and agriculture.
Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. President, or Mr. Chairman. I'd like to have that held back if there's no objection, please.
Absent objection, Senate File 134 will be laid back. All right. That clears the desk. Mr. Floor Leader.
Senator Dockstetter, I move that we stand in recess until January 30th, Monday at 10 a.m.
Heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Oh, announcements, sorry. Senator Scott, and could I have Senator Cooper get committee number 9 ready to announce? Senator Scott.
Mr. President, your committee number 4, Education, will meet, note the time, committee members, 7:30 a.m. on Monday, room 110 downstairs. We'll be considering Senate File 133, Student Eligibility in Interscholastic Sports, Senate File 143, Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act, and Senate File 155, Education Teacher Resources, but not necessarily in that order.
Senator Schuler, and then back to Senator Baldwin. We'll stay on this side of the room for a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Committee Number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources will meet Tuesday, January 31st, 8 o'clock a.m. in Capitol Extension Room 2 and online to hear Senate File 157, Weed and Pest Mitigation, Tribal Inclusion 2, Senate File 173, Financial Institutions, similar names, and Senate File 176, Solid Waste Disposal Districts Consolidation, if time.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin, Chairman Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, will meet Monday at 8 a.m., room 6, and online to hear Senate File 152, Occupational Therapist Criminal History, Senate File 151, Wyoming Prescription Drug Transparency Act.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee number 9, Minerals and Business Development, will meet upon the noon recess on Monday to consider bills Senate File 154, Energy Authority Project Funding, Project Financing, and Senate File 156, Oil and Gas Force Pooling Good Faith Negotiations.
And we have, and thank you for filling in. We have a meeting for today too. You have that notice? You said Monday?
Okay, that's what I understood you were trying to ask me to do, sir, but are we still gonna go forward with the meeting today? Is that the
Yes.
plan? Okay,
Yes.
so with that said, Minerals and
Okay,
Business
Go
Development.
ahead, go ahead. You're doing great.
Pardon?
Go ahead and announce today's meeting.
Okay.
We
so
don't get to go anywhere. We have to
Minerals and
work.
Business Development will meet immediately upon adjournment in room 4 to discuss Senate File 154, Energy Authority Project Financing, and Senate File 156, Oil and Gas Force Pooling, Good Faith Negotiations.
Thanks, Senator. Appreciate that. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Committee 1, Judiciary, will note the time committee. We will meet at 8:30, not 7:30, on Monday morning to take up 2 bills, Mr. Chairman. Senate Joint Resolution 9, Right of Individual Privacy Constitutional Amendment, and Senate File 161, Parental Rights Repealing Conflicting Statute. Again, that's at 8:30 on Monday morning.
Thank you. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs will meet today in about 10, 15 minutes. So head around down committee and to Capitol Century Room W2 and online to consider Senate File 160, Tolling Authority for I-80. Additionally, we'll meet on Monday, January 30th upon adjournment in the Capitol Century Room W2 online to consider Senate File 139, unlawful use of a charge card or debit card, Senate File 164, Public Improvement Contract Requirements Amendments, and if time permits, Defend the Guard Act 2, Senate File 119.
Thank you, Senator Boner. Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 7, corporations, will meet Monday at afternoon at 12:30, and we will continue our discussion of Senate File 142, carbon capture and sequestration. It's an unusual day for the committee. It's Monday at noon recess, 12:30.
We'll change Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, will meet Tuesday, January 31st upon adjournment to consider the following bills: Senate File 107, Acquisition, Exchange, and Sale of Trust Lands; Senate File 126, Barbering and Cosmetology Practice Amendments; and Senate File 138, Unemployment Insurance Coverage Period and Reporting if time permits.
Thank you. Further discussion, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to say that, excuse me, the Wyoming caucus will meet tonight at 7 p.m. and again Monday night at 7 p.m. I don't have the site for that meeting yet, but that's to be determined. Thank you very much.
All right, you heard the motion. Senate will be recessed until 10 a.m. Monday, 30th day of January 2023. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Recessed until Monday.